The rusty chain-link fence surrounding the abandoned factory creaked in the autumn wind as Dion Walker pedaled past on his second-hand bicycle. At 14, he knew every shortcut in the West Side district of Pine Creek, once the proud industrial heart of their small town, now a collection of boarded-up storefronts and foreclosed homes. His grandmother called these streets a monument to broken promises, but to Dion, they were simply home. He slowed down as he passed the massive factory building where, until 3 years ago, Harrington Industries had employed over 800 people, including both his parents. The faded company sign still hung crookedly above the padlocked gates, a daily reminder of what had been lost. Sometimes Dion imagined he could still hear the machinery humming inside, the factory whistle marking shift changes, and his father's deep laugh as he headed home after a good day's work. But those sounds existed only in memory now. 3 miles across town, in the pristine Heights neighborhood, stood the gleaming headquarters of Harrington Global, where Victor Harrington, the man who had closed the factory with a single signature, continued building his fortune. People in West Side spoke his name like a curse. Harrington money don't care about working folks, Dion's grandmother would say, though never with the bitterness others showed. But neither does hating him put food on our table. Dion pedaled faster, racing against the setting sun. Grandmother would worry if he was late, and her heart couldn't handle extra stress these days. At the corner market, he stopped to pick up her medication, generic, because the good insurance had disappeared with his parents' jobs. Mrs. Chen, the pharmacist, smiled as he approached. "Right on time, as always," she said, sliding the small paper bag across the counter. "How's your grandmother today?" "Better," Dion replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "She's teaching piano again this afternoon." 2 new students, Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "Your grandmother's the best teacher in town. Taught my Lisa for years. Always said music feeds the soul when the wallet's empty." She slipped a candy bar into the bag, for later. Growing boys need their strength. This was how West Side survived, people looking out for each other when systems failed them. Dion thanked her and tucked the medication carefully into his backpack. The candy he would save for grandmother, whose sweet tooth remained strong even as her body weakened. The small house they shared had once been filled with family. His parents, his older sister who now worked 2 states away, and grandmother, who had moved in to help after Dion's mother got sick. Now just the 2 of them rattled around in the space, surrounded by photographs of better days. Dion unlocked the front door, immediately hearing the hesitant notes of a piano student working through scales. He waited in the kitchen until the lesson ended, starting dinner with the skill of someone who'd learned to cook by necessity rather than choice. Through the thin walls, he heard his grandmother's patient instructions, her voice still strong despite everything her body had endured. When the student left, she wheeled herself into the kitchen, the smell of dinner drawing her in. "Smells like your daddy's recipe," she said, watching him stir the pot of beans and rice. "Trying to get it right," Dion admitted. "Still doesn't taste like when he made it." "That's because you're missing the secret ingredient." She tapped her chest. "Love and a little bit of anger." "Your daddy said the best meals come from both." They ate at the small kitchen table, the evening news playing softly in the background. Dion tried to shield grandmother from the worst headlines, but tonight's top story made that impossible. Harrington Global announced record profits today, the newscaster reported cheerfully, with CEO Victor Harrington unveiling plans for international expansion. The company's stock jumped 12% on the news. Grandmother's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Dion reached for the remote, but she shook her head. "Let it play," she said quietly. "We don't hide from truth in this house." The screen filled with Victor Harrington's face, handsome, confident, untouched by the consequences of his decisions. Standing at a podium in an expensive suit, he spoke about strategic realignment and focusing on core competencies. Fancy words that had meant the end of livelihoods for hundreds of families in Pine Creek. "That man," grandmother said, studying the screen, "has never missed a meal in his life. Never had to tell a child there's no Christmas this year. Never watched someone he loves die because they couldn't afford proper care." The anger in her voice was rare. Dion had learned stoicism from her, the ability to face hardship without breaking. But tonight, watching Harrington boast about wealth built partly on their suffering, even her composure cracked slightly. "They say he's worth $20 billion now," Dion said, the number almost meaningless in its enormity. "And what's he worth as a man?" she countered. That's the real question. After dinner, Dion washed dishes while grandmother reviewed bills at the table, her face tightening as she calculated what they could pay and what would have to wait. The house had been paid off years ago, a blessing that had kept them from homelessness when everything else fell apart. But property taxes, utilities, and medication costs remained a monthly struggle. I can pick up more shifts at the grocery store, Dion offered, drying his hands on a worn dish towel. He'd been stocking shelves weekends since he turned 14, the youngest they could legally hire. School comes first, she replied firmly. Your education is non-negotiable. Your parents would haunt me if I let you drop out. She didn't mention that his father had been making college plans for Dion since his birth, opening a savings account that had eventually been emptied to pay for his mother's treatments. Some dreams had been sacrificed so others could survive. Later, in his small bedroom, Dion completed homework by lamplight. His history textbook asked questions about economic systems and prosperity, using sterile terms that failed to capture what he'd witnessed firsthand. He wrote his answers carefully, understanding more about capital and labor at 14 than many would learn in a lifetime. From his window, he could see the distant glow of downtown, where the Harrington Global Tower rose above everything else. Some nights he allowed himself to imagine confronting Victor Harrington, asking him if he knew what his business decisions really meant, if he understood that behind the numbers on spreadsheets were people with names, dreams, and heartbeats. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend Tyrell. Basketball tomorrow? 4 p.m. at the court. Basketball had been their escape since elementary school, a place where skill mattered more than circumstances. Dion replied with a thumbs-up emoji, grateful for the promise of normalcy amid their complicated lives. As he prepared for bed, he heard his grandmother's wheelchair in the hallway. She appeared in his doorway, her face softened by the dim light. I was too harsh at dinner, she said. About that Harrington man. Dion shook his head. You weren't wrong, though. Maybe not. But hate is a heavy thing to carry, child, and we're already carrying enough. She wheeled closer to his bed. Your daddy used to say everyone deserves the chance to be better than their worst decision. Even someone who ruined hundreds of lives. Dion asked. She considered this, her eyes reflecting wisdom earned through decades of watching human nature at its best and worst. Especially them, because their choices affect so many others. She patted his hand, her skin papery against his. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's coming whether we're ready or not. After she left, Dion lay awake thinking about choices and consequences. In his 14 years, he'd learned that life wasn't fair, that good people suffered while others prospered, that systems built to protect everyone somehow left some behind. But his grandmother's words echoed in his mind, challenging the easy comfort of anger. Across town, in his penthouse suite, Victor Harrington likely slept soundly, untroubled by thoughts of the families affected by his business decisions. He would never know Dion Walker, would never understand how the stroke of a pen had altered the course of a young boy's life. Their worlds existed in parallel, separate and unequal. But fate has a way of bridging separate worlds, of creating intersections where none seemed possible. And sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the most unexpected encounters. As Dion finally drifted to sleep, neither he nor Victor Harrington could have imagined how their lives would soon collide, or how that collision would shock an entire town and challenge everything they both believed about the world and their places in it. The storm came without warning, turning the afternoon sky to darkness within minutes. Dion had stayed late after school helping Mr. Phillips, his science teacher, organize the lab for next day's experiment. By the time he finished, fat raindrops were already hitting the windows and thunder rolled across the sky. Want me to call your grandmother? Mr. Phillips asked, watching the worsening weather with concern. I can give you a ride home. Dion shook his head. She's at her doctor appointment. Besides, I know a shortcut. He didn't mention that the phone had been disconnected again until they could catch up on bills. Mr. Phillips frowned, unconvinced. At least take this. He handed Dion a raincoat from the lost and found box. Been here all semester. Might as well keep someone dry. The coat was too big, but Dion thanked him and zipped it up. Outside, the rain came down in sheets. His bicycle tires splashed through puddles as he pedaled away from the school, leaning into the wind that fought him at every turn, Lightning flashed overhead, followed by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the ground. The sensible choice would have been to wait out the storm, but Dion's worry about his grandmother outweighed caution. She'd be home from her appointment by now, probably anxious about him. Her heart couldn't handle extra stress. He veered off the main road onto a shortcut, a narrow service path that wound through the abandoned industrial park surrounding Harrington's old factory. It was a ghostly place now, with empty parking lots and buildings slowly reclaimed by nature. Most people avoided it, especially in bad weather, but it would cut 15 minutes off his trip home. The wind howled between buildings as Dion navigated carefully around debris. A fallen branch forced him to brake suddenly, his bike skidding on wet pavement. He managed to stay upright, heart pounding. Maybe this hadn't been his best idea. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the storm's chaos. Metal groaning, glass breaking. Then silence. Dion hesitated, rain streaming down his face. The smart move would be to keep going. But curiosity pulled him toward the noise, around the corner of the old manufacturing building. What he saw made him freeze. A sleek black car had veered off the access road, crashing through the chain-link fence and into a drainage ditch. Steam rose from its crumpled hood, mixing with the rain. The expensive vehicle looked utterly out of place in these forgotten grounds. No one who drove such a car had any business being here. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene. That's when Dion spotted movement inside the car. Someone slumped over the steering wheel. "Hey," he called out, approaching cautiously. "You okay in there?" No response. Just the hiss of the damaged engine and the drumming of rain on metal. Abandoning his bike, Dion ran to the driver's side. The window was cracked but intact. Through it, he could see a man in an expensive suit, blood trickling from his forehead. Something about his face seemed familiar, but Dion couldn't place it. He tried the door handle. It was jammed. The man inside still hadn't moved, and smoke was now curling more urgently from beneath the hood. The smell of gasoline cut through the rain-soaked air. Dion didn't know much about cars, but he knew that combination, smoke, gasoline, damaged engine, was dangerous. He pounded on the window. "Wake up! Your car's smoking." The man stirred slightly but remained unconscious. Dion looked around desperately for something to break the window. Finding a chunk of concrete nearby, he wrapped it in the sleeve of the borrowed raincoat and struck the window repeatedly until it shattered. The noise finally roused the man, who blinked groggily. What happened?" His words slurred together. "Your car crashed. I think it might catch fire. We need to get you out." Reaching through the broken window, Dion unlocked the door and pulled. It groaned but opened slightly, just enough for him to see the man more clearly. Recognition hit him like another crack of thunder. Victor Harrington. The realization froze Dion in place. This wasn't just any rich man who had taken a wrong turn. This was him, the person whose decisions had unraveled his family's life thread by thread. The man whose company had closed the factory, whose policies had denied his mother treatment extensions, whose name was spoken with contempt throughout Westside. For one terrible moment, Dion considered walking away. Let fate handle what came next. No one would know he'd been here. No one would blame him. "Help, please." Harrington's voice was weak, his eyes unfocused. Another lightning strike illuminated the scene, and Dion saw something that stopped his dark thoughts cold. A small photo tucked into the car's visor. A smiling teenage girl, maybe a year older than him. Harrington's daughter, most likely. His grandmother's words from nights before echoed in his mind. Everyone deserves the chance to be better than their worst decision. Smoke billowed more urgently now. There was no more time for moral debate. "I'm going to pull you out," Dion said firmly. "Can you unbuckle your seatbelt?" Harrington fumbled with shaking hands but couldn't manage the simple task. Dion reached across him, pressed the release, then grabbed the man under his arms. "This might hurt," he warned. With strength born of desperation, Dion pulled. Harrington was heavier than he looked, and pain flashed across his face as Dion dragged him through the damaged doorway. They fell backward together onto the muddy ground just as the first flames appeared beneath the car's hood. "We need to move further back," Dion urged, helping the dazed billionaire to his feet. They stumbled away from the vehicle, Harrington leaning heavily on the boy half his size. They'd barely made it 20 yards when a whoosh of igniting gasoline turned the crashed car into a fireball. The force of it knocked them both to the ground. Dion covered his head as debris rained down around them, his ears ringing from the explosion. When he looked up, Harrington was staring at him with an expression Dion couldn't read. Confusion, disbelief, something else beneath the surface. "You saved my life," Harrington said slowly, seeming to realize it himself as he spoke the words. Before Dion could respond, the man's eyes rolled back and he collapsed, unconscious again. Blood still flowed from the gash on his forehead and his breathing was shallow. The explosion would have been visible for miles. Help would come eventually, but Harrington needed medical attention now. Dion pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it still worked. His fingers trembled as he dialed 911. "Emergency services, what's your situation?" "There's been a car accident at the old Harrington factory," Dion explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "A man is hurt. His car exploded. We need an ambulance. We're dispatching emergency services now." "Is the person conscious?" "No, he hit his head. He was awake for a minute, but now he's out again." "Do you know who he is?" Dion looked down at the unconscious figure beside him. The rain had washed some of the blood from his face, but new red rivulets replaced them. "Yes," Dion said quietly. "It's Victor Harrington." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Even the 911 operator recognized the name. "Stay where you are," she said, her tone changing subtly. "Multiple units are on the way." While they waited, Dion took off the borrowed raincoat and placed it over Harrington to keep him from going into shock. He checked the man's pulse the way he'd learned in health class, steady but fast. The rain continued to pour, but the storm's fury was passing, moving east across town. Dion thought about leaving before the ambulance arrived. No one would know he'd been involved. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Not obligation or even decency, but curiosity. This man had been a shadowy figure of power whose decisions had altered countless lives from a distance. Now he was just an injured human, vulnerable and dependent on the very people whose livelihoods he'd destroyed. It was a strange twist of fate that brought them together like this. For years, Dion had imagined confronting Harrington someday, asking him if he ever thought about the families affected by his business choices. He'd never imagined their meeting would happen with Harrington unconscious and bleeding, owing his life to a boy from West Side. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue lights flashed against the rain-slick pavement as emergency vehicles approached. Paramedics rushed toward them, followed by firefighters who headed for the burning car. "I found him like this," Dion explained as they transferred Harrington to a stretcher. His car went off the road in the storm. A paramedic nodded, noticing the raincoat Dion had placed over the injured man. "Quick thinking with the coat. You may have saved his life. What hospital are you taking him to?" Dion asked, unsure why it mattered to him. "Pine Creek, General." The paramedic gave him a curious look. "Did you know him?" The question hung in the rain-heavy air. Did he know Victor Harrington? Not personally. But in another sense, the man had shaped his life more profoundly than most people he interacted with daily. "No," Dion said finally. "I was just passing by." As they loaded Harrington into the ambulance, his eyes fluttered open briefly. His gaze found Dion, standing soaked and muddy beside his retrieved bicycle. Something passed between them. A moment of connection neither could have anticipated or explained. Then the ambulance doors closed, and he was gone. Police officers approached next, asking Dion to explain what happened. He told them the basics, the storm, hearing the crash, pulling Harrington from the car before it exploded. He left out the moment of recognition, the hesitation, the moral choice. Some things weren't meant for police reports. "You'll need to come to the station to give a formal statement," one officer said, "and I'm sure Mr. Harrington's people will want to speak with you." The thought made Dion uneasy. "I need to get home first. My grandmother will be worried." The officer nodded. "We can give you a ride." As they drove through the storm-battered streets of Pine Creek, Dion watched his familiar world slide past the patrol car window. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. He had saved a man's life. Not just any man, but Victor Harrington's. Whatever happened next would change everything for both of them. He didn't know if Harrington would remember him when he fully regained consciousness. He didn't know if saving the billionaire had been an act of courage or folly. He only knew that when faced with the hardest choice, he'd listened to his grandmother's wisdom rather than his own anger. Whether that made him strong or foolish remained to be seen. But as they pulled up to his small house where his grandmother waited anxiously on the porch, Dion felt certain of one thing. The story of Dion Walker and Victor Harrington was only beginning. The next morning, Pine Creek buzzed with news of the accident. By breakfast, everyone knew that Victor Harrington had nearly died on the grounds of his own abandoned factory. By lunch, they knew a local boy had saved him. And by dinner, they knew that boy was Dion Walker from Westside, whose parents had lost their jobs when Harrington closed the plant. The story was too perfect, too ironic for the media to ignore. Reporters camped outside Dion's small house, their satellite trucks and camera equipment looking alien against the neighborhood's worn backdrop. Dion's grandmother kept the curtains drawn, ignoring the doorbell's constant ringing. "You don't owe them your story," she told Dion firmly. "That's yours to give or keep." But hiding wasn't a long-term solution. Dion had missed 2 days of school, and his weekend job at the grocery store had called twice asking if he was coming in. Real life couldn't stay on hold forever, no matter how many news vans lined their street. On the third morning, Dion's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. "Hello? Is this Dion Walker?" A woman's crisp, professional voice. "Yes, who's asking?" "My name is Constance Powell, Mr. Harrington's assistant." A brief pause. "He's asking to see you." Dion sat on the edge of his bed, heart suddenly pounding. "Why?" "He wants to thank you personally." Another pause. "He's still in the hospital. Room 412. There's a private entrance to avoid the press. I can arrange transportation." Dion glanced out his window at the reporters still waiting. "Does he know who I am? I mean, really know?" A longer pause this time. "He knows your name. The rest, I think he'd prefer to hear from you." After hanging up, Dion went to find his grandmother. She was at the kitchen table sorting pills into her weekly organizer. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, the arthritis making even this simple task difficult. "Harrington wants to see me," he said. She looked up, her wise eyes studying him. "Do you want to see him?" Dion hadn't expected the question. He'd assumed she'd have a strong opinion one way or the other. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to tell him exactly who I am. Make him understand what his company did to us. To everyone here." She nodded, closing one of the pill compartments. "And the other part?" "Is afraid I'll just get angry, say things I shouldn't, or that you'll find out he's not the monster we've made him out to be." Her voice was gentle, but the question hit hard. Dion looked away. It was easier to hate someone you'd never met face to face. His grandmother reached for his hand. "Whatever you decide, remember who you are. Your parents raised you to speak truth with dignity. That doesn't change based on who's listening." An hour later, a sleek black car, not unlike the one Dion had pulled Harrington from, arrived at their back door. The driver, a silent man in a suit, nodded respectfully to Dion's grandmother before escorting him to the vehicle. They took back roads to avoid the media, eventually entering Pine Creek General Hospital through a service entrance. A security guard led Dion through quiet hallways to a private wing. Outside room 412, a woman in a tailored business suit waited, tapping on a tablet. She looked up as they approached. "Mr. Walker." She extended her hand. "Constance Powell. Thank you for coming." Her eyes took in his worn jeans and faded t-shirt without judgment. He's awake but still weak. The doctors have limited his visitors to 15 minutes at a time. She opened the door without waiting for his response, ushering him inside. The hospital room looked nothing like the crowded ward where Dion's mother had spent her final weeks. Spacious and private, with actual artwork on the walls and a window overlooking the town's small river. The contrast made his stomach tighten. Victor Harrington sat propped against pillows, a bandage covering one side of his forehead. Despite the hospital gown and the IV line in his arm, he still carried an air of authority. His eyes, sharp blue, alert despite the medication, fixed on Dion immediately. "You're the boy from the accident." His voice was stronger than Dion expected. "Yes, sir." The "sir" slipped out automatically, a habit his father had instilled. "They tell me you pulled me from the car before it exploded." Harrington gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Please sit." Dion hesitated, then sat stiffly on the edge of the chair. "I owe you my life," Harrington continued. "The doctors say I had a concussion and wouldn't have regained consciousness in time to escape the fire." Dion nodded, unsure what to say. The speech he'd imagined giving about his parents, the factory, their struggles, suddenly felt inadequate in the face of this direct gratitude. "May I ask what you were doing near the old factory during a storm?" Harrington asked, taking a shortcut home from school. "I live in West Side." Something flickered across Harrington's face. "West Side. That's near the plant we closed a few years back." 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days, Dion said quietly. The room fell silent. Harrington studied him with new intensity. "You counted the days, my dad did. Every morning until he died last year." Dion met the billionaire's gaze directly. "He was your foreman." "Thomas Walker." The name hit Harrington like a physical blow. He closed his eyes briefly. "Thomas, yes, I remember. Tall man. Always had suggestions for improving the line efficiency. He worked there for 17 years. Started on the floor right out of high school." Harrington looked away toward the window. "And your mother?" "Accounting department. Lisa Walker. She got sick about a year after the closure. No health insurance by then." Dion kept his voice even, stating facts rather than accusations. "She died 6 months before Dad." When Harrington turned back, his expression had changed. The confident executive was gone, replaced by someone older, wearier. "And now you live..." "With my grandmother. She teaches piano when her arthritis isn't too bad." Silence stretched between them again. Outside the door they could hear the hushed voices of hospital staff. "Why did you help me?" Harrington finally asked. "You knew who I was, didn't you?" "At the car." Dion nodded slowly. "I recognized you. Then why? Most people in West Side would have walked away. I've seen the graffiti on the factory walls. I know what they think of me there." Dion thought about the moment of decision. The photo of Harrington's daughter. His grandmother's words, "My grandmother says hating someone takes too much energy." He said simply, "And my parents didn't raise me to let anyone die if I could help, no matter who they were." Harrington's eyes glistened suddenly. He blinked rapidly. "Your parents raised a better person than I've been." The admission hung in the air, unexpected and raw. "The factory closure. It wasn't. I was told it was necessary. Unavoidable. The board, the shareholders." He trailed off, recognizing the hollowness of these explanations. "But I never came to see. Never looked at what happened after." 800 people lost their jobs, Dion said. Most had to leave town to find work. Those who stayed, some ended up on the street. Some lost their homes. Some, like my dad, just lost hope. Harrington winced. "And here you are saving my life." "I didn't do it for thanks," Dion said. "No. I understand that now." Harrington shifted in the bed, grimacing at the movement. "The media is calling you a hero. They want interviews, photos, the whole circus. I don't want that." "What do you want, Dion?" The question was genuine, his gaze direct. The answer came without hesitation. "I want my grandmother to get the medical care she needs without choosing between medicine and food. I want to finish school without working 2 jobs. I want kids in West Side to have a future in this town again." He paused. "I want people with power to see the ones without it as real people, not just numbers on a spreadsheet." Something shifted in Harrington's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. Before he could respond, the door opened and Constance Powell stepped in. "Mr. Harrington, the doctor says your time is up." Her eyes flicked to a monitor beside the bed. "Your blood pressure is elevated." Harrington waved her concern away. "Constance, I need you to set up a meeting with the board as soon as I'm discharged, and contact Lewis from the Community Relations Department." She nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Also," he continued, "I want information on West Side economic data, employment rates, property values, and find Thomas and Lisa Walker's employment files." Dion stood, sensing the meeting was over. "I should go." Harrington reached out suddenly, catching Dion's wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong for someone recovering from a serious accident. "What you did, pulling me from that car when you had every reason not to." He struggled with the words. "It's made me question everything." Dion nodded, uncomfortable with the intensity in the man's eyes. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Harrington asked. "There's more we need to discuss. I have work tomorrow, at the grocery store." "Call in, tell them it's an emergency. I'll make it worth your while." Dion gently removed his wrist from Harrington's grasp. "That's not how things work in West Side, Mr. Harrington. When we make commitments, we keep them. Even when it's hard. Even when something better comes along." The lesson landed. Harrington leaned back against his pillows. a smile ghosting across his face. "You're your father's son, aren't you?" "I try to be," Dion said. As Constance escorted him out, Dion heard Harrington on the phone behind him, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Jenkins? It's Harrington. I know I'm supposed to be resting, but this can't wait. We need to talk about Pine Creek, about what happened after we left, and about what happens next." Walking down the hospital corridor, Dion couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred, that the trajectory of lives beyond just his own had somehow shifted. What that would mean for him, for his grandmother, for Westside, he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. 2 weeks later, a fleet of black SUVs rolled into Westside. They parked along the cracked sidewalk near the community center, a faded brick building that had once been a union hall. Curious residents peered from windows and porches as men in suits emerged, followed by Victor Harrington himself. He looked different than he had in the hospital, still bandaged but standing straight, moving with purpose. When he spotted Dion waiting by the center's entrance, he broke away from his entourage and approached alone. "Thank you for agreeing to this," he said, extending his hand. Dion shook it briefly. "You said it was important. It is." Harrington glanced around at the neighborhood, really seeing it perhaps for the first time. His gaze lingered on boarded windows, on the weed-choked playground, on the hand-painted Westside Strong banner hanging from the community center. "I should have come here years ago." Inside, a small group waited. Dion's grandmother in her wheelchair, Pastor Williams from the local church, Mr. Chen from the pharmacy, and a few other community leaders. They watched with cautious expressions as Harrington entered. These were people who had weathered broken promises before. "I'm not here for a photo opportunity," Harrington began, seeming to read their thoughts. "No press, no cameras, just a conversation that's long overdue." For the next hour they talked, really talked. The community leader spoke plainly about Westside's collapse after the factory closure, the ripple effects that had turned a working-class neighborhood into a struggle for survival. They described families forced to leave homes they'd owned for generations, small businesses shuttered, young people with no future in the town they loved. Harrington listened without interrupting, without defending himself. He took notes in a small leather book, occasionally asking questions but mostly absorbing their reality. When Dion's grandmother spoke about former factory workers now unable to afford their medications, Harrington's pen paused over the page, his knuckles white. "What I'm hearing," he said finally, "is that my company saved money by shifting costs onto your community. We externalized our financial problems and called it success." The room fell silent. None of them had expected this level of directness, this acknowledgement. "That's exactly what happened," Dion's grandmother said, her voice gentle but unflinching. "And it happens every day all over this country. The difference is most CEOs don't end up in a car crash that forces them to see it." A ghost of a smile touched Harrington's face. "Mrs. Walker, I'm beginning to understand why your grandson turned out the way he did." He stood then, moving to the center of the room. "I can't undo the past 3 years, but I can change what happens next." He opened his leather notebook. "I'm prepared to make the following commitments to Westside, not as charity but as repayment of a debt." What followed stunned everyone present. Harrington outlined a comprehensive revitalization plan, reopening the factory with updated sustainable technology, a $50 million community fund for housing, education, and healthcare, priority hiring for former employees and their families, and a commitment to keep operations local for at least 15 years. "The board of directors has approved this plan," he concluded. "Not all willingly, I should add, but they've approved it." Pastor Williams leaned forward, skepticism evident in his weathered face. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrington, why should we believe you? Corporations make promises all the time." "A fair question." Harrington turned to Dion. "Which is why I'm asking Dion to join the oversight committee for the community fund. Full voting rights, full transparency. If we don't keep our word, he'll be the first to know and the first to tell you." Dion stared at him in disbelief. "Me? I'm 16. Yes, and you've shown better judgment than most adults I know." Harrington addressed the room again. "This isn't a PR stunt. It's a new direction. Not just for Westside, but for how Harrington Global does business everywhere." After the meeting, as the others filed out, Harrington asked Dion to stay behind. When they were alone, the billionaire's composed facade faltered slightly. My daughter visited me in the hospital after you left that day, he said. She asked about the boy who saved me. When I told her your story, your parents, the factory, do you know what she said? Dion shook his head. She asked if I could still look her in the eye and tell her I was a good man. Harrington's voice tightened. I couldn't answer her. He moved to the window, looking out at Westside. I've spent 20 years chasing growth metrics, stock prices, market share. I told myself it was just business, never personal. But standing in your neighborhood hearing these stories, it's all personal, isn't it? Every decision affects real people with names and faces and dreams. Dion thought of his father's daily count of days since the closure, his mother's multiple jobs, his grandmother's careful rationing of medication. Yes, he said simply. It's all personal. Harrington nodded, almost to himself. The oversight committee position. You don't have to accept it. Your life is complicated enough without taking on my redemption project. Is that what this is? Dion asked. Your redemption? Perhaps partly, Harrington admitted. But it's also the right thing to do. Sometimes it takes a shock to see what should have been obvious all along. He turned from the window. Whatever your decision, the plan moves forward. We break ground on the factory renovation next month. Later that evening, Dion sat with his grandmother on their small porch, watching fireflies rise from the overgrown yard. He'd told her everything Harrington had said after the meeting. Do you think I should do it? He asked. Join the committee? She considered the question, her hands folded in her lap. Do you believe he's changed? Really changed? I don't know, Dion admitted. Maybe the accident scared him, made him see things differently. Near-death experiences have a way of clearing the mind, she agreed. But lasting change, that's harder. So you think it's just temporary? That he'll go back to his old ways? I didn't say that. She reached over to smooth his worried brow, a gesture from his childhood. I think he's at a crossroads. Having you involved might help him stay on this new path. Or I might just be used to make his company look good. That's the risk, she acknowledged. But consider the alternative. If good people refuse to engage with powerful ones, how will anything ever change? The question hung in the night air, weighty and unresolved. In the distance, they could see the darkened silhouette of the factory against the evening sky, a reminder of what had been lost and what might yet be reclaimed. 3 days later, construction crews arrived at the abandoned factory. Word spread quickly through Westside as massive equipment began clearing debris, preparing for renovation. People gathered along the fence, watching with cautious optimism as the symbol of their hardship was transformed into something new. Dion stood among them, his bicycle beside him. When his phone rang, he already knew who it would be. Have you decided? Harrington asked without preamble. Dion watched a young mother lift her child for a better view of the construction, the boy's eyes wide with excitement. How many families like hers had struggled after the closure? How many might benefit if this second chance was real? I'll do it, Dion said. But I have conditions. Name them. Complete transparency. Nothing hidden. And if I think you're not keeping your promises, I go public with everything I know. A pause. Fair enough. And I want healthcare coverage reinstated for all former employees and their families. Retroactive to when the plant closed, including my grandmother. A longer pause. The board will fight me on the retroactive part. Then fight back, Dion said simply. He could almost hear Harrington smile through the phone. You're going to make this difficult, aren't you? I'm going to make it right, Dion corrected. There's a difference. After hanging up, Dion remained at the fence watching the work begin. A security guard recognized him and waved him over. Mr. Harrington said you should have this. He handed Dion a hard hat and a badge labeled Community Oversight Committee. You can go in if you want, the guard added. See what they're doing firsthand. Dion hesitated only briefly before stepping through the gate, the same gate his father had used for 17 years. The same one that had been padlocked against workers when the closure was announced. As he walked the grounds, workers nodded respectfully. Word of who he was having already spread. One older man approached, his weathered face vaguely familiar. You're Thomas Walker's boy, aren't you? When Dion nodded, the man continued. I worked with your dad for 15 years. He'd be proud seeing you here like this, standing up for Westside. Pride and grief tangled in Dion's chest. I hope so. He would, the man assured him. And if Harrington's really bringing jobs back? Well, your dad would say it's about damn time. Looking around at the activity, the purposeful movement, the beginnings of renewal, Dion felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about all the families, all the lives touched by decisions made in distant boardrooms. Somewhere across town, Victor Harrington was likely facing down his board of directors, fighting for the retroactive healthcare coverage. The man who had once signed paper that destroyed hundreds of lives was now using that same power to rebuild them. People could change, systems could change, but only if someone was willing to hold them accountable. Dion put on the hard hat and stepped further into the future, taking shape around him. 2 years passed, seasons turning like pages of a story that once seemed impossible. The Pine Creek that existed now barely resembled the divided town of before. On a crisp autumn morning, 18-year-old Dion Walker stood on the factory floor, clipboard in hand, watching the steady rhythm of production. Workers moved with purpose around gleaming machinery that bore little resemblance to what his father had known. Solar panels lined the roof, part of Harrington's commitment to sustainability. The air smelled of possibility. Quality control numbers are up again this month, said the floor supervisor, a former employee who'd returned when the plant reopened. Best in the company. Dion nodded, making notes. What had begun as a symbolic position on the oversight committee had evolved into real responsibility. 3 days a week, he worked as a junior operations analyst, learning the business from the inside while attending college classes on scholarship. The other days, he focused on community projects funded by what locals now called the Promise, Harrington's $50 million commitment to Westside. Mr. Harrington's flying in this afternoon, the supervisor added. Quarterly review. Once, this announcement would have sent anxiety rippling through the workforce. Now it brought a different energy, anticipation, even pride. The relationship between Pine Creek and Victor Harrington had transformed in ways few could have predicted. After finishing his rounds, Dion headed to the community center, the same building where Harrington had first made his promises. Once faded and crumbling, it now bustled with activity. Computer labs filled with students, job training programs, health clinics, a food bank that operated on dignity rather than desperation. His grandmother waited in the art room, teaching piano to a group of children. Her wheelchair, now electric, top of the line, provided by the healthcare program Dion had insisted upon. The retroactive coverage had paid for treatments that eased her pain and improved her mobility. She still lived in their small house, refusing Harrington's offer of a new one, but it had been thoroughly renovated, made accessible and energy efficient. She finished the lesson as Dion entered, the children gathering their sheet music. "How's my college man today?" she asked, pride warming her voice. "Busy," he admitted. "Harrington's coming for the review, and I've got a paper due tomorrow." "Economics?" she guessed. "Business ethics." He smiled at the irony. As the children filed out, Dion knelt beside her wheelchair. "The dedication's tomorrow. Are you sure you're up for it?" Her eyes, still sharp despite her 72 years, held his gaze. "I wouldn't miss it for anything. Your parents should have been there, but I'll stand in their place." The dedication. After months of community input, the renovated factory had been named Walker Manufacturing, honoring not just Dion's father, but all the workers who had given years of their lives to the plant. The ceremony would make it official, with town officials and company executives attending. "You nervous about your speech?" she asked. "A little," Dion confessed. "It's hard to find the right words." "Just speak truth," she advised, as she had countless times before. "That's all anyone can ask." Later that afternoon, Dion watched Harrington's helicopter land in the factory's expanded parking lot. The billionaire emerged looking different than the man from the crash, leaner, somehow less burdened despite the gray now prominent in his hair. Stress hadn't left him. It had just transformed into a more purposeful kind. They met in what had once been his father's office, now Dion's temporary workspace 3 days a week. "You've seen the numbers?" Harrington asked after they'd exchanged greetings. Dion nodded. "Production's exceeding projections. The new training program's working. And the community fund? Healthcare claims are up, which is good. Means people are getting care they've put off for years. The small business grants are creating jobs. 14 new businesses in Westside this quarter alone. Harrington smiled, the expression more genuine than the corporate mask he'd worn in his previous life. Your grandmother's piano student program is oversubscribed again. We should consider expanding it. The casual way he mentioned Dion's grandmother reflected the unexpected bond that had formed between them. After initial wariness, she had become one of Harrington's most honest advisors, unafraid to tell him hard truths about privilege and responsibility. He'd come to value her wisdom almost as much as Dion did. There's something else we need to discuss, Harrington said, his tone shifting. The board wants to expand this model, reopen facilities in other communities where we've closed operations. Dion raised an eyebrow. Using Pine Creek as a blueprint? Exactly. They're calling it the Harrington Community Reinvestment Initiative. He looked uncomfortable with the name. They want to announce it at tomorrow's dedication. Sounds like good business, Dion observed. The factory's profitable again. It is. But that's not why we're doing it. Harrington leaned forward. I want you involved in the expansion, not just as a consultant, but as director of the entire initiative. Dion stared at him. I'm 18, still in my first year of college. Age isn't the point. You understand something most of my executives never will: how business decisions affect real people. You've lived both sides of the story. Harrington's gaze was steady. This was never just about Pine Creek for me. It was about changing how business operates everywhere, making corporations accountable to the communities they impact. The offer hung between them, unexpected, enormous in its implications. 2 years ago, Dion couldn't have imagined sitting across from Victor Harrington as an equal, let alone being offered such responsibility. I need to finish school, Dion said finally. Of course, we'd work around your schedule. Full scholarship continues, obviously. Harrington smiled. Think about it. No pressure for an immediate answer. But they both knew what the answer would be. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Perfect weather for the dedication ceremony. Hundreds gathered outside the factory. Former workers and their families. Town officials. Current employees. Media from across the country, drawn by the unlikeliness of the story. The ruthless CEO transformed by the boy who should have hated him most. On a small stage erected for the occasion, Dion stood beside his grandmother, watching Harrington address the crowd. The billionaire spoke of second chances, not just for businesses but for people. He spoke of accountability and community and sustainability, but mostly he spoke of Dion. 2 years ago, a 16-year-old boy pulled me from a burning car when he had every reason to walk away, Harrington said, his voice carrying across the hushed audience. In doing so, he saved more than my life. He saved my humanity. When it was Dion's turn to speak, he looked out at the faces before him. Neighbors who had suffered, workers who had lost hope, children who now had futures in the town they called home. My father counted days, he began simply. 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days from when this factory closed to when he died. Every morning he marked another day of what he called after security escorted him out, after his health care disappeared, after his purpose was taken away. Dion looked at the gleaming factory behind him, the new sign reading, Walker Manufacturing, waiting to be unveiled. Today we begin a different kind of counting. Not days lost, but lives rebuilt. Not what was taken away, but what we created together. As the cover fell from the new sign, revealing his family name in bold letters, Dion felt a weight lift, not just from his shoulders, but from the entire community. His grandmother wiped tears from her eyes. Even Harrington looked moved, the businessman's usual composure softened by genuine emotion. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Dion found a quiet moment with his grandmother near the memorial garden planted at the factory entrance. Small plaques honored those who hadn't lived to see this day, including his parents. They'd be so proud, she said, touching his hand, not just of the factory name, but of the man you've become. Dion gazed at the thriving community around them, PP, who had regained not just jobs but dignity, children playing who now had futures in the town where they were born, the division between Westside and Heights beginning to heal. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been taking that shortcut that day, he admitted. If I hadn't found Harrington's car, his grandmother smiled, wisdom in her eyes. Life gives us moments of choice. What makes us who we are is what we do with them. Across the crowd, Dion caught Harrington's eye. The billionaire nodded slightly, a gesture of respect between two people whose lives had collided in the most unexpected way. In saving Harrington, Dion had indeed rescued the man who had ruined his family. But in doing so, he had also created space for healing, for growth, for transformation that extended far beyond himself. He had proven that compassion could be more powerful than revenge, that holding people accountable didn't mean denying them the chance to change, and that sometimes, the most shocking thing that can happen to a town or to a person is finding hope where it seemed impossible.